In the long, violent, beautiful history of boxing, there is one name that shines brighter than the rest, not just as a champion, not just as a winner, but as something more, the greatest. That name belongs to Muhammad Ali. But what does the greatest really mean? Is it about his boxing record? Is it about his speed, his footwork, his power? Is it about the titles he won, the fights he survived, the legends he defeated? Or is it something deeper, something that cannot be measured on a scoreboard or written in statistics? Because if you look at the numbers alone, you'll find other champions with more wins, fewer losses, more defenses. And yet, when people talk about the greatest boxer of all time, the conversation always finds its way back to Muhammad Ali. Why? Why does his name carry a weight that goes far beyond the ring? Is it because of the way he moved, light as air, dancing on his toes, making heavyweights look slow and clumsy as he floated around them? Is it because of the way he spoke, the poetry, the predictions, the playful insults that turned press conferences into performances? Is it because he defeated some of the most dangerous men ever to wear gloves, Liston, Frazier, Foreman, in fights that felt less like sports and more like epic battles? Or is it because, outside the ring, he stood for something bigger than boxing, refusing to go to war, standing up for his beliefs, speaking out against injustice, and paying a real price for his convictions? To call someone the greatest is not just to say they were good at their job. It's to say they changed the meaning of what that job is. Muhammad Ali didn't just win fights, he changed what it meant to be a fighter. In this documentary, we're going to go deep into that question. Why is Muhammad Ali called the greatest in boxing history? We'll look at the skills that made him unique, the fights that shaped his legend, the courage he showed both inside and outside the ring, and the impact he left on boxing, on culture, and on the world. We'll hear the story of a skinny kid from Louisville who turned a stolen bicycle into a destiny, who turned his doubts into confidence, and who turned his life into a symbol of pride and resistance. This is not just about punches and rounds. This is about image, identity, and influence, about how one man became bigger than his sport, and why, decades after his last fight, his name still echoes louder than any bell. Welcome to Muhammad Ali, the Untold Legacy. This is the story of why Muhammad Ali is called the greatest in boxing history. Before he was the greatest, before the bright lights, the cameras, the chants, and the championship belts, Muhammad Ali was just a little boy named Cassius Marcellus Clay, Jr. He was born in Louisville, Kentucky, a southern city in the United States, in a time when segregation and racism were part of everyday life. He grew up in a black neighborhood, in a world where there were places he simply was not allowed to go because of the color of his skin. His family was not rich. They lived simply. His father painted signs and billboards. His mother worked as a household domestic and cook. They gave him love, but they could not protect him from the reality of the world outside their door. As a child, Cassius Clay was energetic, talkative, and full of life. He liked attention. He liked to talk big, but he was not yet a champion. He was just a boy trying to find his place in a divided world. One day, when he was around 12 years old, something happened that would quietly change his life forever. His bicycle was stolen. It sounds small. A bike is not a world title. It's not a gold medal. It's not $1 million prize. But for a young boy, that bicycle was freedom. It was the way he moved, the way he explored, the way he felt independent. When it disappeared, anger filled him. He ran to report the theft to a police officer named Joe Martin. Cassius told him, with all the fire in his voice, that he wanted to beat up whoever stole his bike. Joe Martin looked at him and said something simple. "Do you know how to fight?" Cassius didn't, not in any real trained way. Joe Martin then pointed him toward a local boxing gym. If he wanted to fight, if he wanted to be strong, if he wanted to defend himself, he would need to learn how. That moment, a stolen bike, a frustrated boy, and a calm policeman quietly opened the door to everything that would follow. Inside the gym, surrounded by heavy bags, speed bags, and the smell of sweat and leather, Cassius Clay found a new world. At first, he was not a genius. He was just another kid learning how to throw a jab, how to keep his hands up, how to move his feet. But he had something that couldn't be taught: hunger. He showed up. He trained. He listened. He watched the older fighters, studied their moves, and then tried to do it better. And slowly something special began to appear. He was fast. Not just fast for a kid, but fast in a way that made people stop and stare. His hands were quick. His feet were even quicker. He moved like he was born to be in the ring. Joe Martin saw it. Other trainers saw it. This boy was different. As he grew, he started to enter local competitions. He won, and won, and won again. The shy boy from Louisville turned into a confident teenager who began to speak in a way that made people either laugh or roll their eyes. He bragged. He rhymed. He predicted. But behind the talk was a truth. He was working harder than most early mornings, long runs, endless rounds in the gym, all of it done with one dream in mind: to become the best. His big breakthrough came when he earned a place on the U.S. Olympic boxing team. In 1960 in Rome, he fought his way to a gold medal. A young black man from segregated Louisville stood on the podium as the national anthem played, wearing the gold he had won with his fists, his speed, and his will. But even then, even with a gold medal around his neck, no one knew yet that this young man would one day be called the greatest. At that time, he was still just Cassius Clay, talented, loud, ambitious, and hungry. The world title was still in the distance. The great wars in the ring were still waiting. The battles outside the ring had not yet begun. But the foundation was already there. A boy shaped by a harsh world, armed with speed, determination, and a growing belief that he was meant for something bigger than anyone around him could imagine. The journey from that stolen bicycle to the words, "I am the greatest," had just begun. Before Muhammad Ali, the heavyweight division looked very different. Heavyweights were supposed to be big, slow, and powerful. They walked forward, they traded punches, they absorbed damage, and they won by being tougher than the man in front of them. Footwork? That was for smaller fighters. Speed and rhythm? That was the language of the lighter weights. The heavyweight ring was a world of giants, not dancers. And then came Cassius Clay, the man who would become Muhammad Ali. From the first moment he stepped into the professional ring, it was clear that something was different. He was big enough to be a heavyweight, but he moved like a middleweight. His feet were never still. He bounced, glided, and slid around the canvas as if the ropes were the edges of a stage and he was performing a dance. In an era when heavyweights planted their feet and traded blows, Ali did something bold. He refused to stand still. He used his jab like a spear, snapping it out again and again, keeping opponents at a distance, touching them, frustrating them, breaking their rhythm. His head movement was subtle, his reflexes sharp. Punches that would have landed on other fighters seemed to miss him by inches. He made dangerous men look clumsy. And while he danced, he talked. He told his opponents what round they were going to lose in. He laughed, he taunted, he recited rhymes. It wasn't just arrogance, it was psychology. He was breaking them down before the final punch ever landed. Then came the phrase that would follow him for the rest of his life. Float like a butterfly, sting like a bee. It sounded poetic, almost like a joke, but it was also a perfect description of his style. Float like a butterfly. Move light, move fast, be untouchable. Sting like a bee. When you do choose to strike, make it sharp, make it sudden, make it count. In a sport where many fighters tried to show how much punishment they could take, Ali showed how much punishment he could avoid. He made defense look beautiful. He made speed the new power. And in doing so, he changed the standards for what a heavyweight could be. Trainers, fans, and other fighters had never seen anything quite like it. Some said he kept his hands too low. Some said he moved too much. Some said his style would never work against the true monsters of the division. But then he began to prove them wrong. One opponent after another found that they simply could not catch him the way they caught others. They swung, they missed, they grew tired, and then, in a flash, he would answer with combinations that seemed to come out of nowhere. This was not just a new fighter. This was a new idea of what a heavyweight champion could look like. A man who did not rely only on size and power, but on timing, intelligence, and movement. Ali turned the ring into a kind of chessboard in motion. And in that moving game, he was often 3 steps ahead. Later, other big men would follow paths that he helped create. Heavyweights who valued footwork, angles, speed, and rhythm. But at the time, he was something shocking, something new. And that is one of the reasons he is called the greatest. He didn't just win in the ring. He rewrote the rules of how a heavyweight could win. Every great legend is built on great battles. For Muhammad Ali, 3 names stand out like mountains on the horizon of his career: Sonny Liston, Joe Frazier, and George Foreman. These were not just fights. They were events that defined who he was and why the world would one day call him the greatest. Let's start with Sonny Liston. Before Ali faced him, Liston was seen as one of the most terrifying heavyweights in the world. He was powerful, stone-faced, and feared. Many believed that when Cassius Clay challenged him, it would be a short, painful lesson for the young, loud challenger. Clay was called a clown, a joker, a loudmouth. People laughed when he shouted, "I will shake up the world." But when the bell rang, something unexpected happened. Clay's speed, his movement, and his fearless attitude completely confused Liston. The bigger, stronger man could not trap him. Clay circled, jabbed, taunted, and slowly broke him down. When Liston quit on his stool, the world had just watched a new champion born. Cassius Clay had shocked the world, and very soon he would become Muhammad Ali. That first great victory announced his arrival. But the fights that truly tested his spirit were still to come. Enter Joe Frazier. If Ali was the dancer, Frazier was the storm. Shorter, relentless, with a left hook that could bend steel. Their rivalry was about more than styles. It became a symbol of different sides of America, different ways of being a champion. The first fight, often called the fight of the century, brought the world's attention to one ring in one night. Ali had been away from boxing during his exile for refusing the draft. Frazier was now champion. When they met, it wasn't just 2 fighters, it was 2 stories crashing into each other. The fight was brutal. Round after round, they traded punishment. Ali's speed and skill against Frazier's pressure and power. In the end, Frazier's left hook sent Ali to the canvas, and Frazier won the decision. Ali had lost. The man who called himself the greatest had been beaten. But this is where another part of greatness appears, not in never falling, but in getting back up. Ali did not disappear. He came back, fought more fights, and eventually met Frazier again. Their second fight, and especially their third, the legendary Thrilla in Manila, pushed both men to the edge of human endurance. In the suffocating heat, they punished each other for round after round. By the end, both were exhausted, both were broken, and yet both refused to quit. Before the final round, Frazier's corner stopped the fight. Ali had won, but he later said it was the closest he had ever felt to dying in the ring. Those fights with Frazier showed the world that Ali was not just a flashy dancer who avoided danger. He could suffer. He could take incredible punishment and still find a way to keep going. That, too, is part of greatness. And then there was George Foreman, younger, stronger, terrifying. Foreman had destroyed other heavyweights with frightening ease. Many believe that when Ali agreed to fight him in Zaire, in the famous Rumble in the Jungle, he was signing up for a beating. People said Ali was too old, too slow, too worn out. But Ali saw something else. He saw a way to win that no one else could see. In the fight, he did something completely unexpected. He leaned back on the ropes, covered up, and let Foreman throw punch after punch, round after round. This strategy would later be called the rope-a-dope. Commentators were shocked. Why was Ali letting this powerful man hit him? But Ali was using his mind. He was letting Foreman burn his energy, punching himself tired against Ali's arms, gloves, and shoulders. All the while, Ali whispered in his ear, taunting him, asking, "Is that all you got?" Slowly, the young destroyer began to fade. And then, in the later rounds, Ali struck. Sharp combinations, sudden speed, and Foreman, exhausted and stunned, fell to the canvas. Against all predictions, Muhammad Ali had done it again. He had beaten the most feared puncher of his era not by being stronger, but by being smarter. These fights, Liston, Frazier, Foreman, are not just points on a record. They are the battles that shape the myth of the greatest. They showed that Ali could win as the young, fast challenger, and as the older, wiser veteran. They showed that he could win with speed, with heart, and with intelligence. They showed that greatness is not just about how you fight when everything is in your favor, but how you adapt, how you survive, and how you rise when the world expects you to fall. If Muhammad Ali had only been fast, if he had only been strong, if he had only been brave, he still would have been a great fighter. But what made him the greatest was not just his body, it was his mind. Long before the first bell rang, Ali was already fighting, not with his fists, but with his words. Press conferences felt like a show. Reporters came not only to ask questions, but to watch a performance. Ali would walk in full of energy, smiling, loud, alive. He made predictions about which round his opponent would fall. He turned their names into jokes. He recited funny, sharp, unforgettable rhymes. "If you were as pretty as me, you'd be world champion too. If you even dream of beating me, you'd better wake up and apologize." To some people, it sounded arrogant. To others, it sounded like poetry. But it was also a strategy. Ali understood that boxing is not only a physical game, it is also a battle of nerves, confidence, and belief. When he talked, he was doing more than entertaining the crowd. He was planting seeds in the minds of his opponents. He wanted them to think about his words when they tried to sleep, when they trained, when they stepped into the ring. He wanted them to feel that they were facing not just a man, but a force, someone who already knew he was going to win. That kind of confidence can be contagious. The crowd feels it. The media feels it. And eventually, sometimes the opponent feels it too. Ali also used his words to hide his fears. Like any fighter, he knew danger. He knew that one punch could change everything. But instead of showing doubt, he covered it with a wall of jokes, predictions, and bold promises. In doing so, he built a character. The greatest, that even he had to live up to. Once you call yourself the greatest in the world, you cannot train like an ordinary man. You have to work like someone who is determined to prove that every word is true. Inside the ring, the psychology continued. Ali talked while fighting. He whispered in his opponent's ear, "You can't hit me. You're too slow." "Is that all you got?" Each word was another punch to their confidence. While their bodies grew tired, their minds began to doubt. And once a fighter starts to doubt, his body often follows. But Ali's mind was not only sharp against others, it was also powerful inside himself. He used language to build belief. He didn't just say, "I am the greatest," to impress the public. He said it to convince himself that he could do what no one else had ever done. He turned his self-belief into a constant soundtrack. In interviews, in the gym, in the mirror. Over time, his mind and his body aligned with that idea. Ali understood something that many champions learn too late, that the most important fight is often the one inside your own head. If you can control your fear, shape your thoughts, and believe in your mission, you can survive storms that would break other people. This is why, even when he lost, Ali remained larger than defeat. He never let a loss define his identity. He always came back talking like a winner, not out of denial, but out of a deep, powerful conviction that he was meant for greatness. In the end, his words were not just noise. They were tools. Tools to unsettle his enemies, tools to entertain the world, and tools to shape his own destiny. And that is another reason why Muhammad Ali is remembered not just as a great boxer, but as the greatest. He won not only with his fists, but with his mind. If we only looked at what Muhammad Ali did inside the ring, he would already be remembered as one of the greatest boxers who ever lived. But the reason so many people call him the greatest goes far beyond punches and titles. It has just as much to do with what he did outside the ring. At a time when many athletes tried to stay quiet about politics, race, and injustice, Muhammad Ali did the opposite. He spoke up, he took sides, and he accepted the consequences. As a young champion, Ali embraced his identity as a black man in a country where black people were still fighting for basic civil rights. He changed his name from Cassius Clay to Muhammad Ali, publicly joining the Nation of Islam and later embracing a more traditional form of Islam. This was not a small decision. In a society where many expected black athletes to smile, keep their heads down, and be grateful, Ali refused to fit that script. He said in front of cameras that he would define himself, his name, his faith, his identity, on his own terms. He talked openly about racism, about inequality, about the way black people were treated in America. He wasn't always polished. He wasn't always careful. But he was honest. He made people uncomfortable. He forced conversations that many preferred to avoid. And then came one of the defining decisions of his life, his refusal to fight in the Vietnam War. When he said, "I ain't got no quarrel with them, Viet Cong," he was not just making a political statement. He was connecting foreign policy with the reality at home. He was asking, why should I kill people overseas when my own people are not treated as equals in my own country? For this stance, he paid a heavy price, losing his title, his boxing license, his prime earning years. He risked prison, poverty, and permanent exile from the sport he loved. But he did not back down. Whether you agree with his politics or not, it is impossible to deny the courage it took to stand against his own government at the peak of his fame. Many people talk about principles. Far fewer are willing to lose everything for them. Ali showed that for him, greatness was not just about how hard he could punch, but how firmly he could stand when the world pushed back. His outspokenness made him a hero to some and a villain to others. But over time, as history moved on, more and more people began to see his choices as acts of conscience rather than disobedience. He became a symbol of resistance, of black pride, of Muslim identity, of the right to follow one's beliefs even when it hurts. Other athletes watched him. They saw that it was possible to use fame not just for money and applause, but for a message. Today, when modern stars take a knee, speak out on social issues, or challenge power, they are walking a path that Ali helped clear. This is why, when people talk about the greatest, they don't just point to highlight reels. They point to moments of sacrifice, moments of risk, moments of moral courage. Muhammad Ali made the world see that a champion is not just someone who wins in the arena, but someone who is willing to stand for something when the arena is gone, the lights are off, and the cost is high. When people see the young Muhammad Ali, fast, beautiful, untouchable, it's easy to think that greatness is all glory. But true greatness always has a price. And Muhammad Ali paid his in full. As the years went by, the speed that once made him unique began to fade. The legs that carried him around the ring like a dancer grew heavier. The reflexes that once allowed him to slip punches by inches became just a little slower. Yet he kept fighting. He fought not just the men in front of him, but time itself. And time is the one opponent no fighter has ever beaten. As he stayed in the game, Ali took more punishment. Wars in the ring that thrilled the crowd left marks deep inside his body. Heavy blows to the head and brain accumulated over years. His famous fights in the 1970s, especially the brutal battles with Joe Frazier and other tough challengers, came at a cost that would not be fully visible until later. He began to slow down, not just in the ring, but in everyday life. His speech grew softer, his movements less controlled. Eventually, he was diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, a neurological condition that affects movement and speech. The man who once danced around giants now sometimes struggled to button a shirt or raise a spoon. The voice that once shook the world with boasts, poems, and declarations of greatness became quiet, shaky, and slow. For many people, it was painful to watch. How could this happen to a man who once seemed invincible? But in a strange, powerful way, Ali's later years revealed a different side of his greatness. He did not hide. He did not disappear from the world. He allowed people to see him in his weakness, trembling, moving slowly, speaking softly. And in doing so, he turned even his illness into part of his story. One of the most iconic moments came when he lit the Olympic flame at the 1996 Atlanta Games. His hand shook as he held the torch. His body was no longer the body of a young champion. But the world did not laugh. The world went silent and then exploded in applause. People cried, not because they pitied him, but because they understood what they were seeing. A man who had given everything, his body, his youth, his comfort, to live the life he believed he was meant to live. His shaking hands were not signs of weakness. They were the marks of a warrior who had gone through more battles than most people could imagine. He had known success and failure, wealth and loss, applause and rejection, strength and fragility. And through it all, he never stopped being Muhammad Ali. He continued to travel, to meet people, to support charities, to inspire those who were sick, poor, or struggling. He stood as a symbol that a human life is not defined only by its most glamorous moments, but also by how a person faces hardship and decline. The losses he took in the ring, especially in his later career, hurt his record. But for many fans, those losses did not make him smaller. They made him more human. And in becoming more human, he somehow became even greater. Because the greatest is not someone who never falls. The greatest is someone who dares greatly, who risks everything, and who faces both victory and defeat with the same unmistakable spirit. Long after Muhammad Ali threw his last punch, his shadow has never left the ring. Every time a new heavyweight champion appears, every time a big fight is announced, one question always returns. But how does he compare to Muhammad Ali? That alone says something about his legacy. Ali did not just live in boxing history. He became the standard by which history is measured. First, he changed the style of the heavyweight division. Before Ali, heavyweights were expected to be strong, upright, and straightforward. After Ali, trainers and fighters began to think differently. Big men could move. Big men could use footwork, angles, and timing. The idea that a heavyweight could float like a butterfly was no longer a joke. It became a goal. Many champions who came after him, fighters with fast hands, quick feet, and sharp jabs, grew up studying his tapes, copying his style, trying to bring a piece of Ali into their own game. Second, he transformed the art of promotion. Before Ali, boxing promotion depended heavily on managers, posters, and newspapers. After Ali, the fighter himself became the show. Press conferences turned into theater. Interviews became stages for charisma, humor, and psychological warfare. When Ali spoke, people listened, even if they knew he was exaggerating. He made people feel something: love, anger, excitement, curiosity. And in a sport that survives on attention, that feeling is everything. Modern combat sports, from boxing to MMA, are filled with trash talkers, big personalities, and self-promoters who sell fights with their mouths before they sell them with their fists. Whether they know it or not, they are following a blueprint that Ali helped draw. Third, he elevated the scale of big fights. Events like the Fight of the Century, Rumble in the Jungle, and Thrilla in Manila were more than matches. They were global spectacles. Governments got involved. Entire nations watched. The fights were not only about who would win, but about culture, politics, identity, and pride. Today, when we see massive fight weeks, world tours, and international hype machines built around a single night, we are seeing echoes of what Ali and his era helped create. Fourth, He changed the image of the champion. He wasn't just a silent warrior who came to the ring, did his job, and disappeared. He had a face, a voice, a personality that people recognized across continents. He made it normal for a boxer to become a global icon, as famous as any movie star or musician. In gyms around the world, young fighters still shadowbox in front of mirrors, imagining themselves like Ali. Hands low, feet light, head tilted back, eyes full of confidence. Trainers still say, "You see what Ali did here? Watch his footwork, watch his jab." Commentators still use his name as a reference point. He moves a little like Ali. He talks like Ali. He wants to be the next Ali. The truth is, there is no next Ali. There are great champions, dominant champions, beloved champions, but Ali occupies a space that is uniquely his own. In boxing gyms, in highlight reels, in documentaries, and in debates about the greatest of all time, his name never leaves the conversation. And that may be the clearest sign of his legacy in the sport. Not just that he once ruled it, but that even after he is gone, the sport still revolves around his memory. By the time Muhammad Ali stopped fighting, he had already done enough to be remembered as a boxing legend. But his impact did not stay trapped inside the ropes. It spread far beyond the ring, into culture, politics, human rights, and the way the world understands courage and identity. In countries he never fought in, children knew his name. They might not have understood the rules of boxing, but they knew who Muhammad Ali was. His face appeared on posters, murals, magazine covers, and T-shirts across the globe. He was not just a boxer from America. He became a symbol of confidence, a symbol of standing up for what you believe, a symbol of the idea that you can come from humble beginnings and still shake the world. For many black people around the world, he was a source of pride. He spoke loudly about black identity at a time when many people wanted black voices to stay quiet. He refused to be apologetic about who he was. That confidence inspired others to see beauty in their own skin, their own features, their own heritage. For Muslims, he became one of the most visible and beloved Muslim figures on earth. In a world that often misunderstood Islam, he showed a human face, kind, playful, strong, compassionate. He made it clear that his faith was not just a label, but a guide that shaped his choices, his discipline, and his worldview. For activists, he became an example of how a famous person could use their platform for more than personal gain. He did not only talk about himself, he talked about war and peace, justice and injustice, dignity and oppression. He visited refugee camps. He supported charities, humanitarian causes, and efforts to help the poor, the sick, and the marginalized. Even when his body was weakened by illness, he continued to appear in public, not to show off strength, but to share hope. He became a living reminder that greatness is not only about what you can do when you are at your best, but also about how you carry yourself when you are at your weakest. His image appeared in songs, movies, books, and art. Rappers mentioned him in their lyrics. Directors used his story as a metaphor for resilience. Writers quoted his lines about belief and courage. Young athletes from every sport, basketball, football, soccer, MMA, pointed to Ali as their hero, not because they wanted to box like him, but because they wanted to live with his kind of conviction. Even people who had never watched a single round of his fights felt connected to his story. The boy whose bike was stolen, the young man who shouted, "I am the greatest," the champion who refused to go to war, the aging legend whose hand shook as he lit the Olympic flame. All of these images blended into one powerful idea, that a human being can be strong and vulnerable, proud and humble, loud and deeply sincere, all at the same time. That is why, when Muhammad Ali died, the reaction was not limited to boxing fans. Leaders, artists, ordinary workers, people from all backgrounds and beliefs paid tribute to him. They were not just saying goodbye to a sportsman. They were saying goodbye to a voice, a symbol, a source of inspiration that had touched millions of lives. His legacy now lives wherever someone dares to speak up for what they believe, wherever a young athlete believes they can be more than just a performer, wherever a person refuses to let the world define their worth. That is the reach of Muhammad Ali. Far beyond the ropes, far beyond boxing, into the hearts and minds of people who may never put on gloves, but who are fighting their own battles every day. In the long story of human history, many people have been called great. Great kings, great generals, great thinkers. But in the world of sports, there is one nickname that stands alone: the greatest. And when we hear it, one name comes to mind: Muhammad Ali. Why? Is it because he was undefeated? No, he lost. Is it because he was the hardest puncher? No, others hit harder. Is it because he had the perfect record, or the most titles, or the cleanest statistics? No. Numbers alone cannot explain Muhammad Ali. He is called the greatest for a different reason, because his greatness was not just about what he did in the ring, but about who he chose to be in every part of his life. He was the boy from Louisville who turned a stolen bicycle into a destiny. He was the young challenger who shocked the world by beating Sonny Liston and declaring, "I am the greatest." He was the artist who reinvented what a heavyweight could look like: floating, dancing, stinging, turning violence into something almost poetic. He was the mind that used words like weapons, breaking opponents before the first punch, and turning press conferences into history. He was the conscience that refused to be silent, saying no to war, no to injustice, no to anyone who tried to tell him who he should be. He was the fighter who lost, who aged, who suffered, and yet never surrendered his dignity. He was the man whose body weakened, whose voice trembled, but whose presence remained powerful enough to move the world to tears. The greatest is not a title that belongs only to the young, the strong, or the undefeated. It belongs to those who dare to truly live, with conviction, with courage, and with an open heart. Muhammad Ali showed us that greatness is not just about how high you climb, but about what you stand for when you reach the top, and what you are willing to lose rather than betray your soul. He showed us that a champion is not simply the last man standing after the bell, but the one who can look in the mirror and say, "I was true to myself." Today, years after his last fight, new champions rise. New records are set. New names appear on the belts and in the headlines. But still, when we ask, who is the greatest, our minds return to that one figure, the man who danced, boasted, sacrificed, suffered, inspired, and loved, the man who turned his life into a message that says, you can start small and still dream big. You can be loud and still be sincere. You can be afraid and still be brave. You can be human and still be great. That is why, when the story of boxing is told, when the story of sport is told, when the story of courage and conviction is told, one name will always rise above the rest: Muhammad Ali. Not just a champion, not just a legend, but the man the world remembers as the greatest.